Good morning, everyone. This is Julie McDonald with Microcom Technologies, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar with Fanvil. Today's host is Tommy Lee, and he is their Vice President of Sales in North America, and he'll be presenting today. If anyone has any questions, please submit them in the question box, and Tommy will answer them at the end of today's presentation. Tommy, thank you so much for being with us today. I am finished for now. Please go ahead and take it on over.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Julie. Welcome on board, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate a bit of your valued time today. Today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I know that many of the reseller and provider base out there is really a service provider that provides a lot of audio phone business. But what I intend to do today is to really kind of stretch out our solution set and really provide some details as to how easy it is to go from a telephone setup into the basic setups of one of our door access systems, because it really is a multi-billion-dollar growing marketplace, and we don't necessarily see that stopping at all, especially the emphasis on security. So what I'm going to do today, at least for a short period, is just to kind of go over a brief overview in what does it actually take for the people that are out there who is very familiar in deploying IP phones and doing these audio conferencing, and what would it take to jump that bridge to go from there into something that actually supports IP access, because what that enables you to do is really expand your ability to provide a broader based solution and not only just focus on telephones. So with that said, I'm just going to kind of go over a brief introduction on the type of solutions that Fanvil provides, and we work along with Microcom in doing these things, and kind of go over just some of the installation guides, some of the things that you have to think about. And believe it or not, when you kind of go over it in this view, it really does, in my opinion, shorten that gap and being able to see what does it take to cross that line. So my goal here is to really go ahead and provide you with just a high-level overview about the installation of door phones. Coupled with this, we also have videos that are on our website. When you go to the support page, you can look at our video library that kind of goes into a little bit more detail than what I'm going to do today. But what I'm going to do is really give you sort of a stepping stool that kind of elevates you, that gives you a further higher level of confidence of being able to jump that bridge in looking into these type of solutions. So with that said, why don't we just go ahead and kind of get started. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of give a quick overview about our iSeries door phone market. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these things because most of the interfaces of all of these door phones are really identical, because they all contain different external casings. This one is more of a commercial outdoor, and obviously the ones that are depicted here is really for a ruggedized environment, meaning that if it's outside in the parking lot and it's made to put up with rain, humidity, snow, those are the units that you pick, and that's really a lot more important. But the internals of it is really all the same. In fact, when you look at the internals of these door phones, they look exactly like the internal GUI of SIP phones, which is something that our user base is very, very familiar with. And when you look at these buttons, this is really nothing more than a speed dial and a bunch of keypads, which is something that's in existence of our phones as well. But it also contains things like integrated video, as well as RFID cards, which kind of gives you the capability of being able to go in and out just by using the swipe. But outside of that, these units don't have to go in the complexity of supporting call parking, busy landfills, and all that stuff. So in many cases, it's far simpler than many of the products that you know very well, and that this is really sort of an easy step to do. I'm not going to go over the details about this matrix. I mean, you kind of go over it. It has things like output relays. Output relays really is the ability for all of these things to control either a locking lock or a mag lock that some of the people do. For those who like to shop at Target or at Macy's, these big glass doors are typically held together with a magnetic lock, but they're all triggered by relays. And this is what the output relay has, and then you could kind of go across and kind of get an idea of the type of relays and how many relays each one will have. Some have built-in cameras, but one of the things that's consistent is that they all support VGA quality video, which means that not only can it support video display on the Fanvil phones, but any really display that could take VGA quality, that will do. And so you can break out these little things into little features that go ahead and match whatever environment that you can go ahead and put in yourself. Okay? Now, here's an interesting scenario, serverless use case. What does that really mean? Because most of these endpoint devices are really what we call internal. And so when you go ahead and look at indoor devices, such as Fanvil's indoor station here, as well as an Android-based indoor station, you have these units over here that are marked on the outside. The good news is that because they're all internal, there really isn't a need to pair this up with a PBX if it's all internal. Now, on the other hand, you have some requirements that require an outside call to call into the unit and then be able to do that. In that case, you will need a PBX to provide that. But in most cases, if you're doing it for an office or for a home, you're not going to use this keypad to dial out to Domino's Pizza and order pizza. You could do that if you had a SIP PBX, but for the most part, in an internal environment, you can actually have all of these things talk to each other on a peer-to-peer basis without involving a PBX, which is a nice level of flexibility that you can do. And you can actually isolate one of our phones to use it as a monitor and take advantage of what I'm going to talk a little bit later about our SIP hotspot, which is a differentiator that Fanvil provides to its client base. Now, on the other hand, there's another case where you have use case with a SIP server. You know, I've come across cases where some people from a remote location have to control numerous gates and stores. You know, one of the things that is growing out there is the ability for people to open up, you know, people-less type of stores where people can go in, but then yet all that's controlled from a central location, and they need an actual SIP server to be able to accept these calls, you know, provide a gate access to allow people to get into the store, as well as being able to provide that level, pardon my coughing, from a remote control standpoint. In that case, you will need a PBX SIP server, whether it's hosted or on-prem, to provide that level of interface. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the type of flexibility that's provided. Now let's take a look at some of the installation guides on the connection, okay? Now, when you look at it, it really isn't that much different than an IP phone, because one of the things that's common is that, yes, this i30, and by the way, even though I use the i30 as an example, most of the interfaces are common when you look at the i30 relative to all of the other features out there. It has an outdoor connection to a power supply, which it can do, but it also has a PoE interface that interfaces to a switch. The thing that's a little bit different is that it also has an external connection which you can actually control an electric lock here or provide internal access so that you can push a button in many cases when you exit a door. Like, say, for example, if you leave a department store, you might push a button and the door might open up all by itself. You know, very often you might see that with a handicap button so that a person could push this and the door automatically opens from the inside. So let's look at the power supply powering from a PoE. This is really no different than really powering an IP phone, because when you open the back of this i30, there is a physical Ethernet switch that you can open it up, plug it in, but as it's also shown in the previous guide, you can also power with an external power supply and plug it in as well. It really depends on the type of implementation that you have on your site. And here's an example when you use a 12-volt 1-amp DC charger, where you can also power it by a power supply. This could either be a plug-in device, or you might have an in-wall power device wire that's already provided to the system itself. Either case is fine, but in essence, it could also interface with all the rest of the people through SIP, because that's what this is. All devices that we display here are all SIP-based endpoints. So when you look at the electrical connection of a thing, you have what we call active mode. And in active mode, it really requires electrical locks that are typically spec'd out at 12 volts or less than 500 milliamps of power. And there are different types of connections where you can connect this. And this is an actual physical connection where you plug it in and you put in like a level connection that's shown on this diagram right here. And you can look at the user manual to really pick out the type of active mode that it really does. Beyond active, you also have passive mode, where also you might have electronic locks that actually do a little bit more than 12 volts and 500 milliamps of power, so that you could jumper these two connections, and these are all really illustrated on the user manual that's also available on our download site when you go to their site and really pick the different types of modes for the electrical lock, so that when it gets a valid passcode, whether it's pressing a key here or being able to accept a remote key access, that it'll automatically open the lock and allow that person to come through. Okay, now let's look at the indoor exit button. You know, some people may have a manual where you don't really need this, but in many cases, you know, to accommodate people that might have disability or something, you might push a door exit where you could push a button, and then all of a sudden the door automatically opens for them for a pre-specified series of time. And all of these timings that you can control through the GUI interface of this actual device. So when you look at the network connection, it really defaults into DHCP mode. It's really no different than what our IP phones do, or what many of the IP phones do. And it says when you do a long press of the key to really get the current IP address. So what does that mean? You could go here and actually look at the pound key. And if you push that for about 3 seconds straight, when you're installing this, it will actually announce the IP address for this device. And all you have to do is put that IP address on your PC, and then you can use the PC to interface the internal GUI. And at that point, you could, at that point in time, upgrade the firmware or set whatever configurations that I'm going to show you remotely. Now, coupling that, for those who really deploy a lot of these devices, whether it's intercoms or door access units, you could also use our cloud-based management or device management device that can actually push these configurations out into these units, so that you sort of have a standard template that you work with every day. Like if you just do the East Coast, you may configure all these things for East Coast time, et cetera, et cetera. So you can have these type of tools that will make you more productive as you move forward. Now let's talk about mounting when you talk about installation. These units that I showed here, the i30, some of the i12s, i33s, these are all really made for wall mount only. Because so what's going to end up happening? It's going to end up sticking out through the wall so that it actually mounts, you know, not flush. But if you need flush mounting, we actually have mounted walls where you can have devices like this that mount flush into the wall, and then you might have things like this that stick out that provide minimal intrusion to the place. But these are all subjective things. Of course, you could do everyone is wall mounted, but if you need flush mounting, you might take a look at the type of device that you're sort of looking at, and of course gauging the type of environment that you really need to sort of mount these devices moving forward. Now let's look at the daily operation. You know, you can actually have a basic call, and when you look at these buttons, you know, this is really nothing more than a speed dial. You know, on our phones, we have even phones that contain well over 100 speed dial phones on this, but you could look at this as one specific speed dial that's going to call to one, or specifically a gang of phones that you may want to set up. And this is something that you may want to do yourself. This could be an absolute front desk or a control tower, or you can actually ring a ring group. How do you go ahead and do that? You could actually have cases where you can actually dial up specific code. You can have a directory here, and you can actually, based on specific key to enter a user dial tone, dial up an extension. And you could use this as a phone to dial specific extensions if you want to. And you can have indoor stations like this that pick up the call. Take, for example, this could be a multi-dwelling unit where if you're in apartment 205, then by golly, you could press a star key 205, and then it'll actually ring the person here, and the video will actually show on the display, giving the resident at apartment 205 who you are, and they could press a key here that will allow this to open the door, and then you can get in. This is really popular in many of the high-rise condominiums and residences that you see everywhere throughout the world. You know, basic calls being made. Of course, you can actually contact this from a peer-to-peer network internally, or you can contact this because from the standpoint, this is all SIP. So when you look at indoor units or an actual phone, you can actually make a call to this unit so that you can actually call it up, provide a remote access key to allow people to get in, or what you can do is you can remotely access the camera so that you can see who's at the door, and you could do what we call advanced video and see who's at the door before you actually engage in a call. These are these type of little, productive things that happen. This is just a quick flow chart of some of the things that has happened where you can establish a conversation. And once you realize that the person at the door is there to deliver flowers to you or deliver food or mail, now all of a sudden you can press the authorization key and it will provide a remote password to go ahead. Now, not only does it provide a remote password, but you could also set a local password here so that if you have this in your house or in a family, you can actually dial in this code, and you can assign a specific code for each member of the family as well, or employee, so that they can go ahead and enter the residence, and you have a running log up to 5,000 people to be able to really enter so that you have some type of way to manage entry and exiting of your building. So beyond that, we also have, instead of keys, we have RFID cards. Of course, RFID can come in cards, but we also have cases where it's entertained in key fobs that go along in a ring. Regardless of it, these all comply with a lot of the RFID ID card standards. So if you have a business that's already having an RFID reader that's inside, you could in essence integrate this and provide video interfaces and provide, external accesses that, people may do it today. Many people may just have an RFID card reader, but they may say, oh, you know what, I want to provide keypad access for those specific situations, and here's a situation where you can go ahead and provide an upgrade moving forward. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you could provide access via a remote unit as well. In a remote unit, obviously, this is a case where you would have to contact this through a remote environment, where you contact it through your remote smartphone or what have you, and then given away, you realize that a relative or a friend wants to enter your apartment. You can just put in the risk code, the passcode key, and that'll allow that person to really go ahead and enter your apartment accordingly. Okay, open via password. So what you can do here is you can really set up a lot of different passwords, as I mentioned earlier. There's also what we call local password, which you could define and actually enter the password where people will actually show up and can enter either one password for everybody, or you can set each individual their individual password. It's all up to you. When you look inside the GUI, you'll actually see little things like this where you actually can define a name, have a specific ID, and then really define a specific access code for that one person. In this case, for example, is 234. You could set up a different person with 567, et cetera, moving forward. So you could provide local passwords as well as access code that you provide from a remote location as well. Exit button, this is pretty easy. This is all primarily hardware driven. So you can actually have a button, put it in, and when that button connects, you can actually open up the door accordingly. Now let's just talk a little bit about setting up the phones. And as I mentioned here, you can actually set this thing up to be interfaced to a SIP server. How does it register to a SIP server? It registers identical to that of an IP phone. You just assign it basically an extension, or you could give it a DID. It's really up to you and how you want to go ahead and reach this device. And you can call into a main number here and have a specific extension go here, but it behaves as though just like an extended phone when you register a SIP. And when you look at the settings, where it's phone number, authentication name, password, the SIP proxy address, all of these things are identical when you take a look at this and register a phone when you have a server setting. Beyond that, we also have a SIP hotspot. This is a sort of a term that Fanvil likes to use to really expand the ability for, say, example, this one unit here, we could call this a SIP hotspot for extension 8000 and use this as sort of the master person where it could interface to this or other clients that are located in other rooms, specific extensions, so that it can go ahead and talk to it without the aid of a PBX, because these are all internal calls and that you could reach out to these people. A perfect example for setting up a SIP hotspot would be hospitality, where you can actually call in to room 205 and you could have one main phone. So you have one line that goes in, but you could declare that main phone as being the primary phone for that specific room and have that phone call all of the remote phones that are located within that room as well. So that's kind of all of the different capabilities that it provides. And so it gives you that access for peer-to-peer or remote networking, coupled with the ability to provide external access as well. How do you actually do this? I mean, this is a screenshot that really kind of gives you a quick menu item. Step 1, you identify a SIP account. Step 2, you can identify a SIP hotspot service where you can actually locate these different IP addresses and really provide these hotspot settings within the master device so that that device sort of becomes a little mini in-network SIP hotspot for you. So when you call up one extension, you could have multiple phones ring. Of course, you could always go to the PBX and set up a ring group. There are just many different ways to do it, but this is just another alternative that gives you an option of how you want to go ahead and deploy on your system. This is just another way for a step 3 and 4, which kind of gives you step 1, 2, 3, and this is really what I consider a cliff note way of setting this thing up. I don't want this to get too geeky on people, but here's a step-by-step device that gives you a really good idea on how to really set up this little hotspot settings for the different remote access devices that you want to control on this one SIP hotspot phone. Here it is, just as an extension as well. I'm not going to go into the details on the step-by-step in a way, but I really outlined it for you. And, you know, it's really kind of looking up and sort of making you know, chocolate chip cookies for that matter. It's really a 5 or 6 step guide to how to go ahead and set up a hotspot, because it's very popular. Because why would you need to have a SIP server if all you're going to do is internal connections to do a door access or an intercom system, because they're all internal connections. So in a hotspot group, this is just really a high-level design, which really you could set up one person as sort of being the master, saying 8,000. Then you can have this as an extension 8004, 3, 2, 1, and you can assign these different extensions on this touch screen here, which gives it the ability to call out all of these different phones individually, because it's all local network peer-to-peer. You know, you could set it up in all your kids' room at home if you decide to use this as a personal device. But then you could also use this as an office device as well, calling different cubes and offices and how you wanted to put this together in your specific scenario. Again, this is just more as a hotspot group, so you could set up specific groups within these units so that you can have easier configurations depending on how you want to go ahead and deploy this out in the field. And this kind of gives you an idea. Again, when you look at it before, you know, this is just a big way of saying this is a rack unit where all of these devices connect into a SIP PBX, but that was before. And what you can actually do now is that this role can now be replaced by either an indoor station, or, and very often we have these telephones here that can really take its place. It's not only limited to the indoor stations, but you could take our XU series phones, our X series phones here, and call that the master hotspot controller, and you can actually interface with all of these other different controllers as well. So these are the type of things that you have, and this is something that's pretty unique to Fanvil, because we actually provide a lot more and provide easy interface capabilities for both internal as well as external communications. Now, of course, this is probably very easy for many of you people out there who deploy phones. SIP speed dial, you know, because with all of these things and these buttons down below, it's really set up in doing a speed dial. And I think most people who are actually deploy phones, this is probably the easiest thing for you. On the actual indoor device, it's one of these buttons here, and on the external, there's one button here that provides the interface to the whole world. I imagine this would be a very simple one for you, assuming that you're relatively a veteran in deploying these units. So you can actually import access lists, so that if you want to go ahead and provide employees, you can actually download this and have this interface to an existing database. Or what you can do is you can actually import a bunch of you know, tables that have a list of people via a CSV file that gives access, so you don't have to reprint all of the key codes and things like that from existing employees. So it does have that import and export capability, you know, so that you're not going to do this one at a time. And last but not least, the RFID card reader here, you can use it to not only read cards, but it also has writing capability, so that if you have a new employee or a new person you want to add on, you can really program this to actually provide it in doing card issue or revoking or destroying cards. This actual reader, as well as many of the other readers out there, have read-write, you know, type of capability, so that you control who accesses and who doesn't. And that's really what it does. And we provide a little bit of a step 1, 2, 3 and how it looks like on the gateway to give you that type of access. Really, that's kind of all I have for now. And I hope that I've kind of provided you at least with a step stool that really answers some of the capabilities of this devices. And when you look at it at a high level, it's very similar to a lot of devices that many of you have already deployed out there. And with that said, I'll go ahead and open it up to, Julie out there to see if she has any questions that you may want to ask, and I'll be here to address any questions you might want to ask accordingly. Okay? So I want to thank you for your time, and I'll just wait along for your questions. I'll give the floor back to Julie.
Thank you so much, Tommy, for that wonderful presentation. And yes, we do have some questions here. Let's go ahead and start with the first one.
Sure.
Here we go. Will any AC adapter work as long as they have the same volt or watt?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. It does expect, you can look at the user manual to really see the voltage setting as well as the amp setting. Because ultimately, when you connect that power supply into the unit, you're going to have to cut off the physical interface anyways and connect it via 2 wires. Because one of those things that I showed you on the internal connection is they're all open wires that actually have connections that you could put on top that makes it for an easy connecting of wires. I don't necessarily show it here, but when you buy the unit, you could just plug in those wires, and as long as it matches the voltage and the amp setting, then you're all set. Because very often you might have entrance units that's going to come with a hot voltage wire setting, and all you need to do is to put that in. Not everybody is going to be stocked with Ethernet, but in either case, you can power it either way.
Excellent. Thanks, Tommy. Next question here for you. Here we go. Are the I-235, the I-315, and the IPv6, are they waterproof?
Oh, the I-30, yeah. In fact, most of these things really comply to a lot of these things outside. They're actually made to be, depending on the ruggedized versions, they're actually made. Some of them actually have a rain shelter above it so that you can actually spray water out it. It's really meant to defy a lot of the cold and the rain weather. Some of these things are even deployed on school campuses where the physical location is in a parking lot for emergency access. So in those cases, yes, it's made to withstand rain. So pick the right one that's really meant for the type of implementation that you want to go ahead and set forth. But yes, they're meant to withstand the temperatures of rain, snow, high humidity, etc., to match the environment.
Excellent. Thanks, Tommy. Next question here for you. With the key code access, is there a manual backup if wireless is not working?
Is there a manual backup? So take, for example, well, if you're actually physically at the location and you're trying to push it, assuming that for some reason if something goes wrong, it should go through. I can't imagine. The only way it wouldn't go through, for example, is maybe that you might have a power outage or something like that. In that case, then you might be able to call in remotely, I guess, on your mobile phone, but that would even require remote access as well. Somewhere or another, there must be a way to be able to bypass that and be able to access it. These remote locks are actually growing a lot in even residences, and that you have to have battery running. In the case of businesses, you might have electricity running 24/7, but in that case, when it's out, I'm not necessarily sure of what emergency scenario you're referring to, in taking care of that. Just because power is out, these type of same locks allow for target access or reaching department stores. Just because it's out, somehow the person's going to be able to get into the building without necessarily having to go through the front should there be a power outage. But it also doesn't provide free access for people to go in once the power outage as well, is because the default setting would be, in a lock position.
Thank you for that, Tommy. Next question here for you. for the card entry, do you also sell the key cards, or is that a separate purchase or service?
We actually do sell some of the key cards, but because it complies with a standard, you could actually go through any of the RFID card manufacturers. We provide it because we actually bring the units, but there are many people who provide RFID cards, third party, and as long as they comply with the RFID standards, there shouldn't be any issue, because these devices were already built to accommodate employees with existing key codes or what have you. So the answer is yes. You can go to third parties and buy RFID, whatever physical format that they desire to meet their specific needs.
Great, thank you so much for that. Couple more questions for you. How and where can we access the GUI for the configuration of the devices? And can this be remotely configured?
The answer is yes. In fact, when you're actually mounting the device, one of the things you do is it has a keypad at the front. There's a star key on the keypad. If you press the star key straight for 3 seconds, what it will do, it will actually announce the GUI Access IP address. So once you do that, you could just write the IP address down on a piece of paper, put that IP address on the GUI interface, and then be able to have full access to it. Of course, this is all protected by username and password and everything like that, but that's how you would get it. So you can actually access that GUI access, that IP code, as long as that IP address is accessible from a remote location.
Thank you for that, Tommy. Next question here for you. Can you create and customize music rings on the iPhone?
That's interesting. The device itself doesn't, but what you can do is that I know that on an iPhone you could actually assign a caller on the device as a specific contact. Because I know I set up different rings depending on whether or not my wife calls me or when my kids call me. You could assign different ringtones. So I'm sure that you could assign a key code or a contact ID for this specific contact, so that if someone were to call you, you could assign a ring code, whether it's an Android device or an iPhone, a specific ringtone. So when that happens, you know exactly what's contacting you. So it's more so on the phone than the actual contact itself, because should the device call your remote phone, it'll contact you as no different than I would call you on an IP phone. There's no different.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Tommy, can you tell us about the warranties on your devices that we spoke about here today?
Yes, the actual warranty, Fanvil provides 2-year warranty on all of our devices. And the real good thing about that is that the 2-year warranty starts from when the distributor hands the device to the installer or the reseller or service provider, what have you. So that keeps a very easy track with, not every manufacturer does that. And what that allows is that allows then, the provider to be able to extend that same level of warranty to their clients as well.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Next question for you. Of course, if a customer needs to reach us, Microcom, and we need to talk out and touch base with Fanvil, can one of us go to your website to look for either technical support or any more detailed information on your devices?
Yeah, the answer to that is great. That's a wonderful question. I want to bring up the level of differentiation that Fanvil brings to Americas. It's because we actually have a manufacturer, SE, that's resident in Americas. In fact, his name is Hector. And what we can do is that if push came to shove and you happen to be in the field or come across a problem, you no longer have to wait 24 or 48 hours, best case, to be able to get a response. You'll likely be able to reach out to a manufacturer's representative, or in many cases, there might be people within our channel partners that might be able to answer these questions as well. But if it all comes back to the manufacturer, we actually have people on board here that can do that. Coupling with having local manufacturer tech support in Americas, We also have a support website that contains many of the training videos that might be able to provide pointers and tips to you, and that's under the support side. So I would suggest you go down. We have a big video library that kind of shows some of the basic configurations and kind of go through there. And if you don't find anything there, you could always send it to support@fanvil.com. But couple that as well, you could just give us a call or give me a call, and I might be able to at least steer you the right way to get some support to you.
Thank you so much for answering those questions for us today, Tommy. And thank you to everyone attending today's webinar. And if anyone has any further questions, of course, please feel free to contact your sales rep or email us at sales@microcomtech.com. And if you wish to view any of the products mentioned or shown today, please visit us at www.microcom.us. And remember, this webinar presentation has been recorded and will be uploaded to our Microcom YouTube channel so you can view it again. Thank you again, Tommy, for your valuable information and your time today. And next time, we will address more interesting information from Fanvil. Thank you again. Bye, everybody. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.